This podcast may contain discussions of graphic violence, unsettling themes, supernatural phenomena, and other topics that some listeners may find disturbing or triggering. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed are simply those of the individual hosts and do not represent the profession of psychology or constitute professional advice. Okay, welcome to the Secret Passage podcast. I'm Dana Vespoli.
And I am Shannon Rogers.
And let's see. What any secret passages that you traveled down this past week?
That's a good question. I did get a cosmetic procedure done on my face because I'm an aging lady and this is what I'm doing now. I got this is something people care about.
You know what? Yes, because it is there is something very, I mean, if we think of a secret passage as also being a little bit mysterious and strange, there is something about present day and our reasons sometimes for seeking out these kind of age reversing procedures. I, of course, have done it with Botox and Juvederm and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, I'm at the same time, I am clinging as much as I can to, youth. And and also trying to accept the changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an interesting straddle. But, the whole time I love my injector person. I love the place I go to. It's this beautiful, it's a chain. It's, where do I go? What's it called? I always forget the name. I'll remember it. But I'm sitting in her chair and we're talking about heinous murders the entire time, and she's she's shooting my lips up with it's called Skin Vive. So it's basically just hyaluronic acid, and they put it into your skin and it spreads all over and it hydrates from the inside. So it's like a
Okay.
moisturizer on the inside. But of course, I have like huge bruises, and I'll have to go into work Monday, I'm sure, with a giant bruise on my lip, and clients will be very concerned about me. And I was joking that I would say something like, I'm so clumsy. I fell down the stairs. Or make some kind of terrible joke about my husband abusing me. I don't know. But they'll be worried, I'm sure. How about you?
I hang on, we're about to hear my dogs, I think. Hey gang, you're fine. My secret passage. What is it, Poochie? What is it? You need attention?
Poochie.
Oh my god.
He's such a
My
mama's boy.
he really is. My journey was being on set. I was on set for 2 days on a feature. It's like a murder mystery adult feature.
Ooh, murder mystery.
Yes, I feel like the company is maybe, or the people in the company are maybe inspired by, like the Knives Out movies, and or Clue. It's always so funny when, even an adult, what you play a character, and so like wearing wardrobe that is I would never wear, but I put it on, I'm like, oh, this works. I would never buy this or wear this myself, but like these kind of long silky dresses and things. And then of course playing a weird like wife that's into cuckolding and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's sort of like, taking a little journey and being on set and playing a odd character. It's very different.
A weird wife. Can you tell us more about her? Or is
Um,
it, do you have to keep it quiet because it's not out yet?
well, I'll just say that it's a company called Team Skeet. It's directed by James Avalon, who's been in the industry for God long before I got in. Very very talented guy. He's a talented editor, camera operator, director. Also, he was directing it. Romy Rain is in it. She's quite an accomplished performer. She played Wonder Woman in a superhero parody, and Christine Edge is in it, and these other characters. But yeah, I mean, again, again, it's a pornographic feature. So all roads, all passages lead to sex. And as usual, it's, you know, a stepmother, stepfather type, you know, thing. I don't know when we're gonna phase out of the faux cest preoccupation. Still don't know how that took off and like just stayed for well over a decade.
And for
But
people who, yeah, and so for people who are listening who aren't like, you know, I'm not very porn savvy. I'm not personally a porn consumer. I just never got into it. But, you know, we've been talking about this thing about the, well, first of all, that you've transitioned into playing roles where you are now the stepmom. You're everybody's stepmom.
I'm everybody's stepmother.
And that there's a theme within porn right now that is incest, but it's not biological parent child incest. It's, you called it faux cest.
Yes, it's like it's within the constraints of the law.
Ah,
Right, because there's the credit card companies and stuff have their hard limits on what they will kind of work, you know, the types of content they will work with, and that's a hard limit for them. I absolutely understand it. I'm not a fan of it, you know, and that's a conversation for another episode. I'm you know, very much conflicted about pornographic content.
mm-hmm.
But yes, that was my secret passage, which brings us to the secret passage podcast episode of the day, which
Ep-
is one that is, we should probably put some sort of a trigger warning, perhaps, that we are going to be talking at length about animal abuse.
yes, and sex with animals
Yes, bestiality.
and
So
romance and sex with animals.
yeah, very, very odd, very curious.
And this is
That's
episode number 2.
Yes, we are on our second episode, getting right into some wild and crazy content.
Mm-hmm.
Without further ado, the name of this episode is The Curious Case of Mr. Hands and Our Relationship to Animals. So, Mr. Hands, for those of you unfamiliar with the Enumclaw horse sex case, is the name of the video in which two men engage in sex with a stallion, whom they referred to as Big Dick. The video was also called Two Guys, One Horse. Mr. Hands is also the name given to Kenneth Pinion, the man who died from injuries sustained from being sodomized by the stallion in the video.
That's a mouthful.
It sure is.
I just thinking about the name. I'm like, Big Dick, huh? That's all they could come up with.
Yes,
I
Big
guess
Dick.
that's all that matters.
Well, that it shows what their preoccupation was,
Mm-hmm.
right? Was with the horse's appendage, more so than him being a horse. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? Like, it seems like just the size of his penis was really just the main focus for these guys.
Mm-hmm.
So the fatal incident occurred on July 2nd, 2005. After Kenneth Pinion was fatally injured, he was dropped at the Enumclaw Community Hospital, where it was determined that he died of acute peritonitis due to perforation of the colon. And the death was ruled accidental, which seems accurate since the horse was effectively tricked into fucking a human. I have many thoughts on this that we can get into later. The big question with this case, with the video and with the nature of this video, is why? Why do this to oneself? And why do this with a horse? I'm gonna say this is a kind of an interesting anecdote, but I was actually privy to this video, the video of Mr. Hands getting sodomized, because it went viral. The video made its way to the internet, and I was on set with Belladonna, who, for those who don't know, she was a pretty popular porn star in the early 2000s, and she had a studio in Hollywood, and I was there, and she was in the office, and she said, you know, hey, Dana, come here, I want to show you something. So I go in to the office, and I'm greeted with this image of a man, you know, bent over, and this horse mounting him, and it's a very quick. It's really just a few seconds. So I she shows me. She's like, "Isn't this crazy?" And I said, "Yes, it is crazy. What the hell is going on?"
Why,
Um,
yes.
and she kept playing it. She goes, I mean, look. And then she plays it again. She goes, I mean, he didn't survive that, right? I'm like, I don't know how anybody could survive it. And she plays it. She keeps repeating it because she can't believe what she's seeing. And I'm just, horrified because I just, there was so much. I'm like, did he get trampled by the, I mean,
Yeah,
it happened so quickly. It is just so aggressive and terrifying, but it made the rounds. It
it
made the
did.
rounds.
That, I guess, on top of that, on another level, what else made the rounds were reaction videos. So people would send people the video and then they would tape their reactions. And that was also a phenomena, I heard.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know how many more times I can keep saying it's crazy. It's crazy. It is crazy.
I kind of
Um,
want to watch it. I've never watched it.
you could probably find it. You probably could find it. I mean, it's very quick. It's the frightening thing is, it became such a spectacle, and Mr. Hands, Kenneth Pinion became the pardon the pun, the butt of so many jokes.
Mm-hmm.
He was effectively kind of stripped of his humanity, as so many people are nowadays, especially now. I mean, back then, in '05, we didn't have Facebook yet. I think we had MySpace. We didn't have social media the way we have it now. And that it is like the kind of focal point of so much of our entertainment now is just going on TikTok, going on X, going on Instagram, and just seeing things happen
Mm-hmm.
and things happening in real time. And again, the people become they're sort of dehumanized and are just kind of there for our entertainment. And this was an early case of it. And naturally he as we know, he died from these injuries, but forever he will be this person, being sodomized by a horse. Anyway,
It's
to continue on, a person who is sexually attracted to animals is called a zoophile, or zoo for short. However, with regard to Kenneth Pinion, it appears to have less to do with being zoo and more to do with desiring really, really intense physical sensations. Kenneth Pinion, Mr. Hands, little backstory or a little background on him. He was born June 22nd, 1960, making him 45 years old at the point he died. He was a Boeing engineer, divorced, and he was a father. In a Vice magazine article, Charles Mudaid, I am not pronouncing his name correctly, I'm sure. It's Mudede. One of the writers of Zoo, the documentary about the case, he's quoted as saying, "I don't think Mr. Hands was actually a zoophilia. I think he was just into fetishes. He was into extreme things and hurting his body. We didn't get into this in the film, but he was involved in a motorcycle accident. He lost a lot of his ability to sense things and had bad neural damage." People in this zoophilia community, though, thought that putting the horse cock in his ass was an effort to feel things again. Getting into extreme stuff was a way to regain neural sensation. He was into fisting, he was into big dildos, he was into pushing things sexually. Pinion found his way into the zoophile group via an online chat where everyone would share fantasies. Included in this chat was James Michael Tate, who was the person responsible for filming the fatal video of Pinion and the horse. After Pinion died, police found hundreds of hours of footage in Tate's possession of men having sex with horses. But Tate was only charged with trespassing onto the property containing the stallion. Jesus Christ, the horse didn't even belong to any of these guys.
Yeah, I think I just watched Zoo, so this is fresh in my mind. They had tried it with another horse that night, and apparently that horse was not in the mood. So then they went over to Big Dick's house.
Oh, so they snuck onto the property and went into the barn.
Yep.
Okay. It just so happened that bestiality was not illegal in the state of Washington, and so criminal trespass in the first degree was the harshest charge that could be brought against James Tate. The Enumclaw horse sex case is what finally led to bestiality being made illegal in Washington state. So, how on earth was bestiality not illegal in Washington, you may ask? Well, what happened is that bestiality kind of slipped through the cracks via an accidental loophole. In the 1970s, several statutes that had criminalized certain sex acts like oral and anal sex in different states across the US were repealed because more often than not, these sex acts were consensual. However, in Washington state, bestiality was lumped in with these sex acts, and so it was essentially accidentally repealed.
Yeesh.
Whoops. That that's pretty much it for the nuts and bolts of this case. None of the other participants in the group involving Kenneth Pinion and James Tate were ever identified. I do wonder if they have moved on to other horses elsewhere or if they've settled on other means of sexual gratification. I'd like to go back to the point that Charles Moudade made about Pinion not being zoo, even though he engaged in bestiality. It seems that none of the other men in the group were necessarily zoo, just into extreme acts. There didn't seem to be attraction to the horses. Rather, it seemed the horses, or in this case, the horse, was a means to an end, like who can take it. There was an almost machismo aspect to the acts themselves. We can go on and on forever about how and the why of extreme sex acts needing to involve horses, but I think that it, along with true zoophiles, comes down to the notion of mankind's dominion over animals. We exploit them, plain and simple. And I don't say this with judgment. I'm trying to be objective. I'm trying to be as objective as possible while I try to understand zoophilia and bestiality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, should we talk about that a little?
Yeah, without question, anyone who engages in bestiality, they're committing animal abuse. I don't think that I need to explain why I think that. It is animal abuse.
Yeah, I mean this is what it boils down to for me, and in sort of thinking about this and deep diving into this over the last couple weeks. It's like, I mean, it's in the DSM, right? And it's in the DSM as a paraphilia. It's in
Zoophilia is, or bestiality? Or
Well, so zoophilia is sort of like not listed specifically. Like necrophilia is also not listed specifically, but they're considered paraphilias. So, like if a doctor or a psychotherapist were to diagnose someone who is, fit the bill,
yeah,
it would be like, paraphilia not otherwise specified, because they
okay.
haven't specified every single one. But it's like it's clear that based on what I read and all the podcasts I listened to. I kept sending you messages about those. I felt
Yes.
guilty. I was like, I'm scandalizing her. And I was trying to wrap my mind around it, because there is a movement within the zoo community to sort of hop on the LGBTQ ticket,
Mm-hmm.
and to also connect with furries. There's like a furry overlap. And there's an out and loud and proud, and there's like a zoo pride. And so there's all these efforts to sort of normalize it. I mean, it's clear that it exists in the population, and there's a
Right.
range of different behaviors, right? Like some people, they just are asexual with animals, but they feel romantic toward them and consider them their partners. And then it runs the gamut, right? And then there's people that believe that they can have sex with animals, and that the animals are actually consenting, by the behavioral cues they're giving off, and that animals can consent, and it's up to the person who's romantically and sexually involved with them to read the cues. And then it goes further into like sadism, and people who actually like horribly abuse animals, which we'll get into later. But so there's this whole range of behaviors. So it's like it exists in the population, but to me, the question seems to be, when people get into a philosophical or ethical discussion about it, it's like, is this something? It's something that people are trying to normalize and trying to make permissible. And there's a real effort on the part of zoos to do that. And then there are other people who are like, no, this is not something to be normalized and accepted and permitted. It's something that it's a mental illness that needs to be diagnosed and treated. And that's kind of where I end up when I think about it. Like, that seems to be where the question hangs out. Is that sort of what you see too? Or
Yes.
uh-huh.
Yes. The thing that I get, I'm not going to say hung up on, but
Mm-hmm.
the notion that animals can consent,
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if anything, it's wishful thinking on the parts of the zoos, that if an animal is, doing things that it's to you, it's done with the intention of, getting you off, or that the animal is deriving sexual pleasure. And we've talked about this, that animals, they don't have sex for pleasure, they have sex for procreation, except for, I think you did the research and you said there's only two types of animals, dolphins and
Humans.
dolphins.
Yeah, humans and dolphins.
Humans and dolphins, yeah, are the only ones that have sex for pleasure. And interestingly enough, humans and dolphins are two species that are actually can be really shitty, can be really awful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dolphins
Mm-hmm.
have been known for being kind of sadistic and terrible. They rape, don't they?
Yeah, they're the rapists of the sea. Sea otters rape too. Sea otters rape baby seals. When I found that out, I was my world was torn apart.
Yeah,
I love otters.
yeah,
So right, yes, they don't right. Their motivation isn't the same, and they're also your little captive audience. I mean, they would depend on humans for their food, for their care, for everything.
yeah. They're pack animals, like dogs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if we use dogs as an example, dogs are pack animals. They see who is the leader, and they will attach to you because you are in charge of their survival. If you do not feed them, they will not eat. They're counting on you. And they don't have and I think there's science to back this up. I mean, their intelligence level is such that if you're getting them to do anything, if you're training them to do anything, they're doing it because they have to,
Yeah, yeah.
not because they want to. And so, this notion that zoos are engaging in some sort of consensual romantic relationship with an animal, the notion that it's consensual is wishful thinking. It's bizarre, and it's abuse.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to really. I mean, actually, when I try to talk about it right now,
Hmm.
what happens is my mind goes blank, and then I feel this like my stomach drops because it's like I've talked about this with pedophilia with some friends, some therapist friends, and because we were talking about how pedophilia is sometimes now framed as a sexual orientation. And that's kind of the zoo way of thinking about it is like this is a sexual orientation. And it's like it's sad because I think about people who really truly have these urges and really truly want to act on them, and then I think, what would it be like to have this urge and this desire and that impulse that's so strong, and to have it be like, well, it's like too bad for you, because if you do that to a kid, it hurts them, and therefore you're not going to get to do that. And I think that's what we're saying when we say it harms animals, and then there's a dot dot dot, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's hard because I think what happens is people feel a lot of disgust, I think, when it comes to stuff like this, and like pedophilia and necrophilia. Like, there's so much disgust that there's a lot of like shame, the shaming and like, criminalizing, pathologizing. I think we don't need to do that, but I understand why people end up doing that, because they just find it so disturbing, because they're empathizing with the child or the animal, like, and it's a difficult. I mean, I think so. Then I guess I get caught in sort of like, the sticky part is like the belief around the consent, the belief that it's not harmful, right?
Hmm.
Like those guys going into that stall at night, using the pheromones, engaging with a horse in this way, they, in their minds, they don't see that it has any harm.
I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
For these guys,
Uh-huh.
because I don't think that they're true zoos.
Uh-huh.
For these guys, I think that the horse, because I think of them almost like it's a cultural thing, in terms of them being like kind of cowboys. And so for them, the horse is a utility. The horse is a means to an end. They're not necessarily, I think, concerned with the whether or not the horse. I don't think they care if the horse consents or not. So for them, I think, because they weren't looking at the horse with any desire, I think they were looking at his appendage and the force with which the horse can enter you, as a sort of that it sort of like was a show of their own virility. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The guy that they interviewed in Zoo, he seemed different. The guy
Oh
who
yeah,
was,
I think they interviewed an actual zoo.
yeah, and he was the guy. I think it was Tate. I think,
No.
really, because he said that he felt really guilty for, because I should go back and watch it, but I think it was him. I mean, I don't know if it was him actually, but he was in that crew, and he was talking about how he invited them over for dinner, and how
Oh,
how
okay.
how Kenneth Pinion was not going to go that night because Kenneth Pinion's son and his wife were actually visiting him from out of town, but then
Oh,
they kind of goaded him into going that night, and he felt super guilty
okay.
because yes, but I don't think I think he is the lone, if there is a person, he seemed like the ranch hand guy that they're interviewing.
Okay.
He said that he was like, one thing he said that was so poignant, because we talked about this, about like why someone might feel an emotional connection to an animal in this way.
Hmm.
And he said that his interest in animals started after his mom died when he was 16. He had this
Okay.
experience, and then it was like pleasurable. And then, he started talking about how humans categorize everything, animals don't do that. Felt like there was this thing about like it's easier to be with an animal, it's less complicated, it's less fraught, like people categorize. And he kept talking about how the group of people who were having sex with the horses were classless. There wasn't like a class issue. Kenneth Pinion was this guy who was an engineer. He was a farmhand. There were other people from other walks of life, and they all got together in their shared experience. They'd have potlucks, and and then they'd go have sex with horses. But he said it was like a classless society, and
Sure.
it made me think about like, oh, is it some fear? Is it some like fear of actually being in a human relationship that is much more complex, and having this being able to have this other kind of relationship where you can sort of pour all of your love into this animal and imagine it coming back at you from a being that's like far less complicated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and the thing with animals
Mm-hmm.
is there's no malice.
Right.
An animal won't leave you.
Or judge
Um,
you.
it's not going to judge you. It's not going to leave you. For example, you have a dog. You are your dog's entire world. I mean, there's the clips about it on social media where it shows like a dog waiting for a person saying, when you
Yeah.
come home from work, I'm sorry if I seem annoying. I've been waiting all day for you.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm a part of your life. You're my entire life, which is incredibly sweet, and always, it never fails to like choke me up. I don't think that anybody that ends up a zoo or what have you is there because their lives were normal. I feel like it feels like it could be a trauma response. And again, I have no basis for this. Is just an assumption I'm making that someone ends up a zoo because of some kind of trauma. I'm not trying to be like, oh, everybody in sex work was sexually abused. Everyone that ends up doing this was, abused. But it does feel like it is a trauma response in some ways to shift romantic feelings onto an animal.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. Like humans are complicated.
Yeah, we are.
Humans are difficult, and there's a lot that gets brought up in relationships with them, and like love and loss, and and also just having needs, human needs. But he said something and this is sort of aligning with what you're saying. He talked about with an animal, it's like a simpler, plain world. And he said for a few minutes you can get disconnected. It's like these are your friends. Anyway, it just feels like, yeah, like if you have a history where your relationships with humans don't go so well, and being with them causes you a lot of shame or anxiety, or feelings you don't like, being with animals is a good option.
Yeah.
I mean, animals will love you no matter what.
Right.
But yeah, but then it comes back again to like, how can you truly be sure that that's a yes you're getting? That's an okay, go ahead, let's get down and dirty. I don't think
Oh,
we can
yeah.
know.
Well, I don't see how a dog, any of these animals can, if they're not, if they don't have sex for pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
then the only reason why an animal would consent is because it has been trained to.
Yes.
And again, in the same way that you can groom a child and a child can tell you yes, a child will, number one, can't legally consent, but a child's brain isn't developed to the point where it can even fully understand. I mean, you'll read about cases of elementary school age children consenting to sex acts with an adult, and they're they're a child and you're
Yeah.
in a position of power and authority. So is that consent? No, so
Yeah,
that's
I
the
know.
thing.
It's really like that thing. I mean, it's really that sort of like what my friend, the veterinarian, was talking about too. It's like just because you can doesn't mean you should. Doesn't
Oh,
mean
no
yeah.
kidding.
Yeah, and like again, I just end up drawing a blank because I think there's no real. It's one of those things where one side sees it one way, another side sees it another way, and then but then the question really is like we prevent legal. So there's the psychological question, right? Like,
Right.
and all the issues with that, like why is this person doing what led to this person, having this sort of way of life and wanting this for themselves, and their history, what context are they in, because people do things in different contexts that they wouldn't normally do, like if a guy goes to prison and he doesn't identify as, like, his sexual preference is not men, but over time he may end up, just sleeping with men because that's what's there. You know what I
Right.
mean? So context has a big role to play in all behavior. So it just makes me think about like all those variables. It's like you can get really curious about them and talk about them. Then you can talk about the morality and you can talk about consent. But then part of me is like, well, where do you draw the line in order to protect animals? Like legally. When does it become a legal issue, like with pedophilia, necrophilia, and on what? Because then there's the argument people throw in about, well, we abuse animals all the time in factory farming and by eating them. We make use of them for our own pleasure by eating them. But yeah, so I guess that's where I sort of sit around with these questions. But they're, bottom line, is it doing harm? I guess that's the question, right? For like
Yeah,
uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
I think so. And I'm going to wrap up
Okay.
Mr. Hands here, and then we can move on.
Okay.
But so wrapping up the case of Mr. Hands and the Enumclaw horse sex case, Charles Moudade revisited Enumclaw, Washington, 10 years after the case, and not surprisingly, no one wanted to discuss the case at all. After bestiality was made illegal, all the horse fucking enthusiasts moved to parts of the country where bestiality was not illegal. Tate moved to Tennessee and was charged with animal cruelty in 2009, so there's that.
Do we know what he did?
Probably had sex with another horse.
I'll take a wild guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally making an assumption that that's
Yeah.
what happened. I could be wrong. Yeah, it didn't say
Uh-huh.
specifically, but I'm going to assume that's what it was. When asking the question of why someone might want to have sex with an animal, kind of getting back to where you were going, we have to consider our own relationship to animals. For example, I'm not a vegan, but I do treat my animals like my children. I have two dogs, I have three cats, I have a bearded dragon. I consider their feelings. I let them sleep with me. Even the bearded dragon, at one point when we had the Woolsey fire and we had to evacuate, I had to pluck my bearded dragon out of the tank, and he
Mm.
just had to kind of live on my body in a hotel and
Oh.
sleep with me and all that kind of stuff during that time. But I miss my animals when I'm away from them. Yeah, I don't eat pig products because I think of pigs as very dog-like. I'm conflicted about cows. I scroll through Instagram and see posts about how cute baby cows are, and then a few posts down there will be, pictures of steak dinners.
Mm.
There's a cognitive dissonance in children's shows having cute farm animal characters and then feeding them those animals for dinner. It's really strange how we are as humans. These are just observations. I've personally held baby chicks and chickens, and then I've eaten chicken curry the next day. I include myself in this. We're fully aware of the atrocities of factory farming, but we still buy the products. We're
Mm.
perhaps hardwired to consume animals, and the factory farming is simply a byproduct of where we are now in terms of technology and population. It reminds me of Jonathan Safran Foer, who he wrote this book called Eating Animals. Have you read it?
I haven't. It's on my list.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, Eating Animals, it's a book where he explores the moral implications of eating animals. He wrote it, I think he was, what was it? He was preparing to become a father and was sort of, I suppose like us, having these philosophical thoughts about animals and eating animals and, kind of like the moral ethical implications of that. There's a passage in the book where he describes a farmer who's preparing to kill a cow. And just before he does, the cow affectionately licks the guy's hand. And it doesn't stop the farmer from killing him.
Mm-hmm.
But the farmer's he's not a bad guy. It's just that's his role.
Mm-hmm.
And there is that sort of
Mm.
mentality of that this is simply the way things are,
Mm-hmm.
and that the farmer can at once recognize the cow is like a sentient being, while at the same time understanding that his role is to slaughter the cow because that is his job, and honestly, I think it's preferable like the whole factory farming situation. I want to say that the farmer was like a regular kind of like, old timey type farmer,
Yeah, not like a massive.
not an assembly line.
Ugh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I read this horrific thing about what they do at factory farming.
Oh God, no.
I won't tell it.
Okay.
It's too much, I think. I mean, it's out there in the newspaper, but ugh.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, no, I mean, he's just a farmer. He gets this affectionate lick on his hand, and he knows that this is his role in the cycle. Like, he's fulfilling his role. He has a relationship with the animal that's different, I guess, than a factory farmer would be.
Yeah, it. Yeah, so I think about that, and I think about how, as human beings, and many would argue that as humans we're superior species. Apex predators who are meant to kill and consume animals. But you can also make the argument that what makes us superior is our ability to reason, and so maybe our ability to reason should allow us to examine more closely our relationship to animals, the ways in which we consume them, exploit them, and consider, the how and the why we do the things that we do, and maybe we'd want to do some things differently. This is talking about normal people, not animal abusers, but just us, just normal people.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, our ability to question our behavior and have it not be completely instinct driven. I'm just thinking about how, like, we're a cooperative species that allowed for us to like get here and survive, and like, we have language, we have our prefrontal cortex, our ability to not just be completely driven by our drives. But I'm getting all these, like, in my X feed, I'm getting a ton of nature videos, but they're all brutal, like,
Right.
and I've always thought, it's such a brutal deal to be a being on this planet, because in order to survive, you have to kill something else, even if it's a plant, like, you have to kill something else to
Yeah.
survive. And it's kind of like, yeah, the question about how do we want to do it? Can we do it differently? Is a good question, because we should be doing it differently with the eating animals, I think.
Well, just being conscious. It
Mm-hmm.
really just comes down to, I think, being conscious. It doesn't mean giving up meat. It doesn't mean, I mean, you can. I like, again, I can't eat pig products, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's just me. That's just my perception of pigs.
I eat everything. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard. It's Omnivore's Dilemma was like such a good book. Did you read that?
No.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's so about this. But right, like, being conscious. And we don't have to do things in such a barbaric way to feed ourselves. We really don't. We can there's a humane way to raise animals and treat them and then kill them and eat them. Although I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of people who would argue with me about that. A lot of vegans out there would argue with me about that, but
Yeah, there's an account that I follow on Instagram, Howie the Crab, and
Oh.
it's this woman Laura. I don't know her last name, but she has this crab, this pet crab named Howie. Howie's actually a girl, and she talks about, like, because Howie is this adorable crab that interacts with her and is very, very cute. And so Laura, it doesn't just have Howie. She has a lot of other different, animals that she takes care of. I want to say one of them is a squirrel,
Aw.
but just a lot of animals. But she talks about, like, boiling crab's alive, lobster's alive, like they feel it.
Oh my God.
And she's like, I'm not saying don't eat crab or lobster. It's just, again, it's that be aware, you know. She goes, I'm not telling you to not eat things. Just be aware that there's no reason why you have to torture or hurt crustaceans.
And that's an empathy thing.
Yes,
And empathy is a complex cognitive emotional process, and not everybody has the same amount of empathy. But I mean, it is true. It's like, think about it, feel into it for a moment. Why, like, I guess the orientation one, I assume the orientation we have is to, and it's not everyone, but is to, as much as we can, prevent suffering for ourselves and other sentient beings.
right.
But I know that's not, and I think cluing into that would be like, wow, wouldn't societies be so much better if people could be trained and taught to think of themselves and other sentient beings as deserving care, and as, let's prevent as much suffering as we can. I mean,
Right.
pain and suffering, two different things, but pain is just a fact of life, and not a thing really that we can avoid. But we can suffer less, and we can help other beings suffer less. And still, I think an argument can be made for eating animals, because that's just, what our body is designed in a way, aren't we evolved eating animals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see here. There is, I've been dreading this part, but it is relevant and fairly recent. It's been within the past year. I dread it because it is especially grotesque and much, much more horrifying than a human tricking a stallion into sodomizing him. This is the case of an esteemed zoologist, no less, a man by the name of Adam Britton. This case took place in England, and he was charged with raping, torturing, and killing dogs that he would get from rescue organizations. He looked like a normal person, and again, he had this sort of, he was a very successful zoologist. You would assume that a zoologist would be mindful and careful with animals, but his interestingly, his specialty was reptiles, was like crocodiles, alligators, which I feel like is very fitting for him to be
He's a
more
human
preoccupied,
reptile.
yeah, with something that doesn't, that with a reptile brain. He probably identified with them. But this man's capacity for cruelty was absolutely terrifying, profoundly upsetting and terrifying. Yeah, I think it's worth so anyway, God bless the person who went into I don't know if it was like a Reddit or like a Telegram, one of these chat rooms, and did the hard research to basically. I want to say that someone was infiltrating this as a way to bring it down in the same way that people go into different sort of like,
It's
what's
like
the
a
word, dark web.
sleuth, like an internet sleuth, right?
Yes, sort of like the don't fuck with cats
Yeah.
type people.
That is so freaking brave, because the very little I've heard about this case, like a couple of the things that he did to animals have stuck with me, and I have, like, they come up over and over and over again.
I
The
shudder.
horrifying images,
Yes.
yes, of
Yes.
what he did to animals.
I physically, like, I shudder
Yeah.
when, because it I'll be just fucking going about my day and I will get a flash of something, or sometimes I'm just trying to, I want to know. He was arrested. He was married. His wife didn't
Yeah.
know,
And they had
which,
2 dogs that he was abusing, right?
yes, and apparently she disappeared, probably changed her name, took off, and to be fair, it is quite possible that she had no idea. It is quite possible she had no idea. That
Mhm.
happens. Look at Dennis Rader, serial killer,
Yeah.
who's his wife didn't know, but he was arrested because they were able to find him based on a dog that had been given to him by a rescue, had some sort of special collar that was from that rescue. They were able to basically trace the dog to him, but he would also go and get dogs from families that were advertising on some sort of Craigslist type situation, and he
Ugh.
delighted in watching the children cry
Oh
as
my
their
God.
dog was taken away by this man because the family, was moving or could no longer take care. But he delighted in the child's misery.
Oh.
And this is, I think, significant that he was delighting in a child's misery, because one of these internet sleuths basically sort of said, hey, how about doing this to a kid, like kind of leading him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Adam Britton showed interest in eventually doing this to children. And what do they say about, you know, the precursor to a lot of murderers, serial killers, is they start with animals.
Yeah.
So that might be the thing that is keeping him in prison, because I think the recidivism rate is really high with anyone that, I mean, first of all, animal torture to this degree, and then children. Like you want to risk having somebody that is enthusiastic about moving on to kids like out there. But I don't know what the legal system is like in England at all. And I
He
don't know if
only
he's
got
still behind bars or what the deal is.
he got 10 years. And so I think he had looked and searched for child porn, but I don't, he might have had it in his possession. I know that was in there somewhere,
Sure.
but he's only got 10 years. That means he'll be out again probably in his lifetime.
Yeah.
Ugh. And you know, I mean, couldn't they just feed him to a crocodile? Wouldn't that be great?
That would be some amazing poetic justice right there.
Or to
And
throw him to the dogs.
to be fair, not fair. There's no fairness. I always want to, when we talk about how someone ends up doing terrible things, and again, this is not to say that let's feel sorry for Adam Britton, but this is also something when we were talking about Peter Madsen in the last episode. They had horrible childhoods, like fucking horrible childhoods. From what I understand, Adam Britton was a very, very abused child, which is a way to understand or explain how someone can be capable of this degree of cruelty. And I know there's plenty of people that were very, very abused, and you sometimes you go one way and you become a better person somehow, or you get the help you need, or you go the other way.
Absolutely. And like,
Yeah.
right, an explanation is not an excuse. And you know what you're saying is true. It's like we all have our personal evolutions. We all have our personal histories and contexts that shape us. And you know, all human behavior, this is something my consultant has drilled into my brain over and over again, you know, all human behavior makes sense if you understand the context and the history. And sure, there are people who are born into great circumstances and go out and do heinous things. That happens.
Yeah.
But there are people, you know, it's like some, you know, how does, and I think that's the main fascination. I think that's why we're here, this podcast. It's like this fascination with kind of like, how does like a little 2 or 3 year old person, little kid, like think of little kids, you know, and your own kids at that age, and just how open they are, and kind of they're growing into themselves. They're, you know, so much matters about the environment in terms of how they grow. And you look at that and you think, how did that kid turn into this person that does these horrendous things to animals and videotapes them? And, you know, how did that happen? It's, you know, I don't have any answers, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's what's interesting with the Adam Britton case, and also with Mr. Hands, is this need to document these activities.
Yeah.
You know, they it's how, well, a couple things. It's how they got caught, right? If there
Mm-hmm.
hadn't been any documentation of Mr. Hands and all the other kind of events involving horses with the guys,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they would have never been found. Maybe bestiality would still be legal in Washington State.
No kidding. Well, it's interesting too to think about how a behavior on the outside looks like in therapy land. We call this the topography. You know, like if you look at the topography, it looks the same, right? But the
Right.
function may be totally different, right? So somebody could be like the function for the guy in zoo of like sharing, you know, having it be a group, having image, you know, things that they share image wise, it really felt relational and
Yes.
social. And in this case, I'm like, what is it? Is it relational? It could speak to this profound drive we have. We're social beings, you know, at our very core. But
Right.
it also feels exhibitionist
Right.
in this case, in Britain's case. There's something so narcissistically grandstanding about how he shares and what he shares, right?
I mean, essentially, he was showing off.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And also it's a way to relive the experience
Mm,
in the same way that like with Ted Bundy, he would revisit where the bodies were buried
yes.
sometimes,
Like, oh yeah, yeah, to get off again or to.
yeah, to kind of relive the experience. But yeah, with the men in there was definitely something, I think, for Mr. Hands, for Kenneth Pinion. I think the sense of community, more so than anything else, was what he was seeking
Hmm.
with these guys, because they didn't see him as their equal. They saw him as this intellectual sort of effete. He wasn't a cowboy. He was an engineer, and so I think for them it was a virility thing with the
Hmm.
horses. And I think for Kenneth Pinion it was a way of participating in something and not feeling like a freak.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he was needing bigger and bigger, more kind of something to feel something with his injury. So I've always felt a lot of compassion for Kenneth Pinion, because I just didn't see him as Zoo, or even as somebody that would ever really hurt an animal. Just he participated in this thing. I think his reasons were very, very different.
Yeah, and like just on a metaphor level, it makes me think about my pitch to all my clients is like, if you can't feel pain, that's a problem. And most
Yeah.
of us, and he was kind of having that. He couldn't. It reminds me. I have a friend in elementary school who got, well, junior high. No, high school. It was in high school. She got in a car accident and she was became quadriplegic. And no, oh God, I think she's paraplegic. I'm not sure.
Her
Yeah,
upper
she's
body could move, but just
yeah,
not
yeah,
her.
her upper
Okay.
body can move. But she was telling me, this is a long time ago, that, and this just goes to like the whole thing about pain, right? Like if
Right.
he had been able to feel pain, he would have stopped maybe. I mean, he wouldn't have
Yeah.
been there. But she couldn't feel anything in her legs. And one time, the danger of it is, she was doing her hair and she set her curling iron down on her leg and she didn't realize it until she could smell her skin burning.
Oh God.
And so it kind of reminded me of that. It's like this, he's trying to feel something, but he doesn't have the capacity. I mean, he didn't have and that's, I mean, I feel like that's how he died. Like he didn't rush off to the hospital. They hung out afterwards at the house and he started looking pale and sweaty. And they were like, we got to get you to the hospital. And so just sort of the dangers of that come to
Yeah.
mind. Yeah. And I wonder, and I think that's part, his was physical, but I'm thinking about like, sociopathy or psychopathy and Britain, so they say like with psychopaths, that their nervous systems are different. It takes a lot for them to feel kind of excitement. It just makes me wonder, like, did those things, did he do those things because he couldn't feel anything unless it was that kind of intense? Because I know I had a professor once tell me that they were doing research on psychopaths, and if you stuck your hand in an ice bucket, your heart rate would go up and all your vitals would change. But you do that with a psychopath and nothing changes. Their nervous system is just like meh, flatline. So yeah, I wonder about that, like looking for that kind of thrill.
By inflicting pain.
Yeah.
So would you say that maybe it was like by proxy, like observing or regarding the pain that he's inflicting on another living creature? Is it to create?
It's hard to imagine.
Right. It's like what he wants to see the suffering because he's incapable of feeling anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I know very, very, as much as we, I know what I've learned about this. I know what I've learned from, true crime podcasts and books. And clinically, I'm no expert on psychopathy or any of it. But I don't know. I think what I imagine is walking around understimulated all the time by everything. Like
Okay.
I think some people who have that, they jump out of airplanes, they
Sure.
volunteer to go into the military, they do things that people who like us with our nervous systems would never do. Like,
Right.
and they need more stimulation. And then they get more stimulation, then they want even more than that. And that's why they kind of graduate onto other more brutal things. I think this is my theory, my very like I'm making it up right now theory, but that's what I imagine is like, because most of us would be like, if we were curious, like I remember being a kid and going, oh, if you put salt on a snail, it will like dissolve it and melt
Right.
it. And I'm being very curious about doing that. And like, I'm going, I'm going to do that, thinking I'm going to do that. And I go out there with some salt and I see a snail and I'm all, no way. like something rises up in me, something rose up and was like, ooh, like, no, don't do that. That's just horrible. Like I couldn't live with what, but to him it might be titillating. Let's
Sure.
see. Cruel. I mean, it's almost like the surgeon mind. We talk about how surgeons have.
Oh, there's I saw it again recently that the highest, like that the fields that attract the most psychopaths are, medicine, but also the military,
Mm-hmm.
which absolutely makes sense. If you can
Mm-hmm.
go and kill a whole bunch of people, including some collateral damage civilians, and then sleep that night,
Yes.
it's the only way a psychopath can do that. Yeah, it's interesting because with, again, some of my background is also in being a dominatrix, and part of the job of me being a dominatrix was inflicting pain on a client or masochist. And it's interesting because obviously it's consensual, so I don't have to feel guilt about, whipping, binding, doing any of these things to a client. There is something to be said about being fascinated by observing someone's pain response,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also a case of part of my job, or a big part of my job. A lot of people don't understand, or just assume that a dominatrix is just kind of like having fun, just beating the crap out of somebody. But no, I mean, you're trying to push someone to the limit that they've established, but you also need to do it safely.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're also trying to keep that person okay and safe and be mindful of that. But I'm just imagining somebody who's has none of that, that is just out
Yeah.
there trying to inflict as much pain as possible,
And push past whatever limit the
pushing
person.
past it, and
Mm-hmm.
the end result is death, right?
God, you
But
must have so much insight though into like, because I feel like I have very, very little insight into like either the neurology of, like, well, I know that there's a relationship between pain and pleasure, but it's to having experienced that on your end where you were observed, and that there, it takes a lot of control to observe those boundaries. And like, is there anything that came up for you that you find was really interesting, or was it like that you want to share, or is it just kind of
yeah,
mhm.
I would never have become a dominatrix without first having subbed.
Mhm.
You can really only, I think, safely. I think it's important to understand the submissive mind, and I've enjoyed subbing as well. There is the kind of relaxation you feel after having gone through. I did a thing where I was like shocked with electricity, and they call it a dilemma, where I had to like stand on my toes. My calves were hurting, while at the same time, like, if I dropped my heels, then I would be hit with electricity. And so, your calves are dying. It's frustrating. And so you're just like, that's part of it, is just
Mm.
being completely frustrated. The high that you feel coming out of a sub experience is amazing. If that's your thing, obviously it's someone else's worst nightmare. But coming through it, I would always cry, but it felt good. It did feel good. Being pushed like that. And in a lot of ways, being a sub was easy. It was the easy part. Being a dom, your mind is constantly working. A sub, you can just completely just you go outside your head. And so I would have clients that would say, "Oh my God, this is great, and now I can relax for the rest of the month." And they had jobs where they were in charge of hiring and
Mm.
firing people. It's a lot of pressure. And so
Mm.
they would come into my environment and, request all kinds of really tough sessions and things. To a lot of it involved being fisted in the ass, or all these kinds of things, getting spit on, being humiliated, all that. They would just be able to relax afterwards. And
Mhm.
and I get that. I completely understand that. As a dominator, I don't really do it anymore because it is exhausting. It is really exhausting. And if you're doing it the right way, you're being mindful of your sub safety, and you have to play a little bit of like psychologist, kind of,
Mhm.
because they go into a that's called a subspace, and it's not a safe it's you have to be careful with them, because there's a
Yeah.
point sometimes of no return where they just will go too far, and then it can become dangerous and stuff. But
Wow, a delicate balance, sounds like.
Like a psychopath should never be a dominatrix, but I'm sure there are some psychopaths out there that are doms. Like, of course, that would attract that. But yeah, so
That's really interesting. That's a whole other episode. I feel like we could talk about that because there's so much to unpack there.
yeah, I was never I was never like a hard hardened like career dominatrix. It was just something that I would do on occasion. But there's a few doms that I really respect that are incredibly, and they're the most compassionate people. Some of the best people are doms. Like they're
Yeah.
very very empathetic. You have to be to do the job correctly, I think.
Oh yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, you have to be very, very attuned. And you're not looking for it kind of reminds me of those immersive horror experiences.
Like McCamey Manor.
Yeah. So like some people want I don't think people are coming for the McCamey Manor experience where they're actually really feeling like they might
In
be
danger.
murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're going for more like a different kind of space where they can let go and there is some actual trust.
Right.
Like if it crossed into the territory where they're like, uh-oh, like I can't, like in the McCamey Manor,
Mm-hmm.
it ceases to be, I mean, but yeah, anyway, is that true? Is that kind of accurate that they aren't really wanting to feel actual terror about getting, or what do you
I
think?
think that there is an element of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think for some.
Mm-hmm.
See, there's some and we can get into that in another episode. I've still got to send you this DVD documentary about insects. It's a website that used to exist. Brent Scott was the man behind it, but it was, I mean, it's torture. Like there's it's literal torture. People being deprived, like submerged in water in a cage,
Oh, wow.
whipping, like some corporal punishment that leaves bloody marks, things like that, where it really verges, like it's. I want to say the Department of Homeland Security shut down INSAC's his website because it was torture, literal
Wow.
torture.
I
But
I
again,
think have I pulled us in another direction completely.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, yeah. We'll get veering back into this is because of Adam Britton and him being like a psychopath. Would he be a psychopath or would he be a sociopath?
This is such a good question again. I don't, for me, so like bestiality, just to bring it all home, like
Yeah,
zoophilia, bestiality, to me, it's like all these words get used to describe, it's very confusing what people mean when they use these words. For me, sociopath and psychopath is the same thing.
right.
Neither of them are in the DSM. The thing that's in the DSM is antisocial personality disorder, which kind of fits. But I
Adam Britton
think,
for sure.
yeah, but I think, yeah, the question, I think when you and I talk about sociopath, psychopath, I think we're talking about like, is this a person born with the biological kind of tendency to have less empathy, have a nervous system that looks like this, right? You're looking at one that's like hardwired, and then one that's made by the environment. Is that kind of a distinction, or
Yes,
no?
if I
Mm-hmm.
recall correctly,
Mm-hmm.
the rule of thumb is psychopaths are born, sociopaths are made.
Yeah, I look at it as totally complex interaction between biology and environment.
Okay.
But I also do think that and I think this is documented somewhere by someone smarter than me, that people are born that way, apparently. But you
Sure.
can be born that way though and shaped in another direction. And I think what you would see is like someone who's a very successful CEO,
Yeah.
who's competitive, who does like jet skiing, who jumps out of airplanes, who, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you might not even in your mind, it wouldn't look like a criminal psychopath. It would look like someone who has no fear and a lot of confidence and maybe not that much empathy, but so I don't know. But yes, I think I don't know. Adam Britton to me,
I mean, he does not seem organized. I mean, maybe he was.
well, he seems, that kill room he had
That was organized.
yeah, that kill room. Oh God, the way that he inflicted the torture,
Hmm.
that he did things to puppies in front of the
Yeah.
mother
Yeah.
dog that would hurt the mother psychologically. That
Yeah.
to me is like, you are just cruel on another level, man. Like,
That's very like Joseph Mengele, you know what I
uh-huh.
mean, who really delighted in Joseph Mengele would sort of enjoy being really kind to the Jewish children in the camp and like giving them candy, taking them for rides, being nice, and then escorting them right to the gas chamber.
Oh God.
It was getting their trust, making them feel safe only to betray them. He would also lose his temper and just shoot someone, you know. So that it was
Wow.
it's reminiscent of that. It's enjoying the pain that's inflicted.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just like yeah, yeah. Ugh. So disturbing.
so disturbing. Yeah, bringing this back or even wrapping this
Yeah.
up, that this really does come down to this. I mean, I'm reminded of the who's the quote by, is it Gandhi, the that you judge you judge a society by the way they treat its weakest members, or also I want to say that there's a quote that involves like animals, the way that you treat children and animals who are the most innocent among us, you know, children and
Yes.
animals are. And so I guess all that to say, it's I mean, we've looked at extreme examples of how people have hurt animals, have tried to justify through being recognized as somehow a protected class, you
Mm-hmm.
know, of people. Oh, well, you know, we love animals, we're zoos, we need to be recognized, we're misunderstood, in the same way that pedophiles are supposed to are trying to be seen as a protected class also, that they can't help it.
Yeah, and children and animals need and deserve our protection,
Yeah.
basically. And that feels like a very sane and humane cause to take up, to protect those that can't protect themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
I think about how so a lot of the way that our behavior is towards animals is very cultural as well. In bigger cities, you tend to see, you know, and that, like when I do pet care, the places that have the most business tend to be bigger cities,
Mm-hmm.
where people will spend money to make sure that their animals are cared for if they go out of town and things. And then you'll look at some regions in the United States, for example, where animals are still like left tied up outside, not really paid attention to,
Oh my
um,
God.
because it's a perception of animals as, I think, as a utility.
Utilitarian. Yeah, we can do what we want with them. And
Yeah, they serve a purpose. They are here to serve us or amuse us, which brings me to the little interesting anecdote that I shared with you earlier this morning about the French actor Alain Delon, who passed away I want to say a week ago, a few days ago even.
mm-hmm.
He has total animal lover, right? He's had lots of dogs. He loves them very much, and he had this Belgian Malinois that he absolutely loved, and he requested that when he died, he wanted his dog euthanized and buried with him.
Mm.
That did not happen, thankfully. There was a huge outrage. People did not want this to happen. His dog was in fine health. The dog, can you imagine, was just like, "Whoa, wait a minute. Like,
I don't
I
love you that
miss
much.
you. I love you very much. I'm a dog, so I'm not long for this world anyway. You're just gonna have to wait in the afterlife for me. I still have some good years left." So no one was gonna euthanize the dog. But it was just that I apparently he was just like, well, my dog will just be so despondent without me. I mean, my dog would just be
Mm.
something to the effect of like his dog wouldn't want to live without him. And I'm like, did the dog tell you that? Did are you that full of yourself? Like, you don't think that the dog can miss you, but at the same time enjoy whoever is taking care of him and enjoy being outside and all that. And it becomes that odd projection that you
Yes.
see, you
Well, yeah,
know?
right. Like, yeah, like, well, there's the on one hand, it's like, is this like a super compassionate? He thinks he's being so compassionate in his mind. Underneath all that, it really gets to, and I'm probably going to say this a bazillion times during this podcast,
Yeah.
but it really reveals this very human, this fundamental thing this fundamental error or confusion we have. Like, we're always trying to avoid pain. We'll do anything to avoid pain. So it was like so unimaginable for him that his dog would just feel a very normal thing to feel as a pack animal when one of
Right.
your pack dies, which is grief and loss, and dogs do feel that.
They do grieve.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was so unbearable for him that his dog could have those very normal to be expected feelings, that he would rather kill it than let it have that experience. It just speaks to this thing about us. We really don't like to feel pain.
I'm just imagining Like I look at Poochie and Bruno. I'm like, hey gang, I got some bad news for you.
We're all gonna die.
Mama's not long for this world. Tick tock, tick tock.
I just imagine your bearded dragon's face. Huh?
Yeah, he's just like whatever. My joke with Gennady is that he thinks I'm insufferable and he calls me woman. He has because he's a bearded dragon, so he's Australian. He goes, "Oi, woman, woman, feed me."
Gennady's like, but I don't even have feelings. Can
He's
I
like,
live?
whatever. No, he would be totally fine until my body stopped producing heat, and then he'd look really pissed and disappointed.
And then you just crawl and find another source of heat.
Yeah, he just crawls over to Poochie and Bruno.
Oh man. Well, this has been quite the episode. This has been quite the path today.
We took an interesting journey.
We took a real dark passage today, a secret dark passage.
Oh, this was a dark passage, all right.
It was really, really, really great to get to be here with you discussing these horrific people and events. So, what should we say?
Trying to get us closer to understanding the darkness that exists in us.
Yes, and not in us specifically, but in us, the universal us.
Yes, the collective us.
Although we do have darkness, don't we?
Oh, yes, we do. Follow us on X.
Also, that we will be doing video podcasts as soon as I can come to terms with how I look on camera. So we're at Secret Pass Pod on X and on Instagram. I think it's just Secret Passage Podcast. Sorry, guys.
Amazing.
We're new at this. Yes, Secret Passage Podcast. And if you hear anything here that you'd like to respond to, you can always post and message us.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's right. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
Yay.
Hooray.
Okay, Dana.
All right. I guess we can over and out.
Okay, over and out.